My name is Alexandra Dwyer, and this is my Project 3B multi-model presentation. The topic or discourse community I have chosen is mortuary science. I will be talking to you today about this discourse community. I will start with explaining what it is, the history behind mortuary science, frequently asked questions regarding this discourse community, and the basic observations I have made through the course of this project. What is mortuary science? Mortuary science is a specific discourse community with common public goals, such as delivering superior service to all grieving families and taking care of all funeral arrangements when a death occurs, whether it be cremation or burial. Its main public goal, as understood both by a practicing member as well as any professional organization associated with mortuary science, is ultimately to bury the dead. Mortuary science is the study of dead bodies. People who work in mortuary science normally work in jobs such as morticians, embalmers, or funeral directors. Mortuary science is an interesting field that includes science, biology, chemistry, anatomy, embalming, and embalming art. The term is most often applied to a college curriculum in the United States that prepares a student for a career as a mortician or funeral director. The history of mortuary science. Funeral directing occurred in ancient times. Funerals have been around since the start of the first settlers in America. Until the mid-1800s, American families often took care of their own dead and held private funerals. The funeral industry started to take off after the Civil War and really engaged full throttle in the middle of the 20th century, where the business model was then being outsourced to funeral homes with florists, casket manufacturers, insurance companies, and cosmetic and automobile companies. The industry became a business that was heavily criticized for its costs, particularly the embalming process, and being a service reserved for the wealthy. Additional criticism came from the religious side, where displaying a body in an open casket supposedly violated religious ideals. There were also reports of fraudulent activity and corruption in funeral homes, where clients were extorted for additional charges. Facilities for mortuary science include a wake room, which is used for services and visitations, a preparation room, which is used for embalming and restoration, merchandise display, which features casket and urns, a privacy room, usually for the family, an office for administrative use, and a library to be available 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. These are some of the terms you may use or hear in the funeral home. A funeral home is the most popular choice when choosing where to lay a loved one out for a viewing or wake. Other options may include doing a funeral home in your home, at school, a church, a banquet center, or doing direct cremation and skipping a viewing. Two main questions are proposed, however, when reflecting on mortuary science. First, what is the process of embalming and why do we embalm? Second, what is the average cost of a typical funeral today? Let's start with embalming. The definition of embalming is the process of preserving a dead body by means of circulating preservative and anesthetic through veins and arteries. This is done for many reasons, one being that it is important to preserve a body before burial. What I learned from all of my sources is that embalming is actually not required. Every state has a different law regarding embalming. In Michigan, the law states that embalming must be done within 48 hours following death. This means if a body sits and is not cremated or buried within those first 48 hours following death, it is by law required to embalm. There are some states which have a law stating embalming is required after 10 days following death. What does embalming involve? No two embalming practices are the same, and with each new body comes a new level of difficulty. It is very important for a funeral director to not only be familiar with the embalming room, but to be comfortable when working in this space. There are three main steps to embalming. First is the post-mortem autopsy, second is the edemosis case, and third is the long-term preservation or delayed embalming step. Does everyone need to be embalmed, though? The Federal Trade Commission has included statements about embalming in the federal rule, which guides funeral service providers in offering services and products to consumers. The funeral law statement on embalming requires funeral service providers to inform consumers that the law does not require embalming. The language the FTC requires says, except in certain special cases, embalming is not required by law. Embalming may be necessary, however, if you select certain funeral arrangements, such as a funeral with a viewing. If you do not want embalming, you have the right to choose an arrangement that does not require you to pay for it, such as direct cremation or immediate burial. Facts you should know about embalming. 5 facts. 1 being embalming is rarely required by law. 2 being embalming provides no public health benefit according to the U.S. Centers for Disease Control and Canadian health authorities. Hawaii and Ontario forbid embalming if the person died of a certain contagious disease. 3 being embalming does not preserve the human body forever. It merely delays the natural consequences of death. 4, embalming is a physically invasive process in which special devices are implanted and chemicals and techniques are used to give an appearance of restful repose. And 5, being refrigeration is always an alternative to maintain a body while awaiting a funeral service or when there is a delay in making arrangements. Not all funeral homes have refrigeration facilities, but most hospitals do. Other options other than embalming include cremation or direct burial. Cremation is the combustion, vaporization, and oxidation of dead bodies to basic chemical compounds such as gas, ash, and mineral fragments. Funeral costs. Now let's switch over to our second question, what is the average cost of a typical funeral today? This is a question I'm sure everyone wonders but can't seem to figure out. Do you know the average cost of a funeral? If not, guess in your head and see if you can think of what it might possibly cost. Well, according to today's statistics, a typical American family will spend between $8,000 and $10,000 on just one funeral. Of course, this is just the average price of a funeral, and funeral costs can typically be reduced depending on how much you are able and willing to spend. Many Americans see the typical funeral differently across the country. Caskets are the most expensive item on your funeral bill, in which these costs can be reduced by choosing a lower-end casket or using a rentable casket. There are so many decisions to face when unexpectedly having to deal with the death of a loved one. It is important to be familiar with all of your options before meeting with a funeral home to discuss the options you have chosen. It is a big decision to make, and it is important to get all of the small details exactly how you and your family would want. The breakdown of these costs. The quality of the funeral home is not pinned to the amount of money you spend. Whether the loss is sudden and unexpected or the result is a long-time illness, it's important to honor the life of someone who has died and to come together as a community to share grief and get support from each other. This can be accomplished by spending a few $100s on direct cremation with private memorial gathering, or by spending $100,000 on an elaborate funeral. Both can be dignified and meaningful choices. The Federal Trade Commission regulates funeral homes and has established a series of rules called the Funeral Rule. The Funeral Rule protects consumers' right to purchase funeral goods and services separately. You do not have to accept a package that includes items you do not want. The Funeral Rule requires every funeral home to have a general price list. It is also referred to as a GPL. The GPL is a written, itemized list of all the items and services the funeral home has to offer. The 3 basic cost categories when dealing with the funeral home service can be divided into 3 basic categories. Number 1 being the basic service fee. This is the funeral providers are allowed to charge this, and it can't be declined by the consumers. This fee covers services common to all funeral homes, including the use of the home, the services of the funeral director and funeral home attendants, burial arrangement coordination with a cemetery or other funeral home, and security permits. The next cost category being optional service charges. Some optional service include transporting the body, embalming, times for viewing, use of hearse or limousine, burial container urns, cremation, or interment. The third basic cost category is cash disbursements. This covers goods and services that the funeral home buys on your behalf with your consent. It may include the purchase of flowers, clergy services, obituary notices, pallbearers, and other services provided like soloists or musicians. How can you cut down your funeral costs? Well, cremation is now becoming a more popular choice with a lot of American families. Many families are choosing to cremate and save all of their money. Of course, cremation as well comes at a hefty price. In 1960, the average price for a funeral was just $706, and the cremation rate was 3%, compared to now being at 45% cremation rate. Overall, the costs of funerals are constantly on the rise, but no two funerals are the same. There are many options being used in funeral homes all over the world. There are ways to cut down costs, payment plans to help you afford a funeral, and anything it takes to cover your funeral expenses. To conclude with this presentation, I would just like to say thank you for watching and being involved in this topic. I hope you are now more educated on the cost of a funeral and the after-death care that takes place when a loved one dies. Death might be a scary topic to some of you, but it is something we all must face sooner or later. Whether it is a friend, family member, or pet, we all must be educated on the funeral industry. Not only will this help you make more informed decisions when you are pre-planning or choosing options for a loved one, but it will save you money down the line. Thank you.